George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Genocide Joe Biden was giving out Halloween treats at the White House last night. Antony Blinken came dressed as a Ukrainian flag. He brought his son with him, dressed as Zelensky. Well, a Zelensky will always get treats at the American taxpayers' expense from Joe Biden. Meanwhile, Time magazine, that had Zelensky as their man of the year this week, depicts him as wandering the corridors of power in Kiev, utterly delusional, with no one left believing in his cause except himself. And the Financial Times debunks the whole canard that the resistance in Gaza has something to do with ISIS. No, says the Financial Times. Hamas are more Viet Cong than ISIS. I wonder what happened to the Viet Cong in their struggle. And the Financial Times is backing a ceasefire in Gaza. So is the Pope. So is the overwhelming majority of public opinion just about everywhere in the world, but not where it counts. In the chancelleries, in the government headquarters, in the presidential palaces. It's genocide as usual. Oh, and World War III starts at dawn on Friday morning. Listen up for more. This is going to be the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
In times to come, people will write not just PhD theses, not just books, but whole courses in schools and universities will study just the extraordinary ease with which the establishment in your country and mine managed to wheel the best part of a whole population. First on the virus that dare not speak its name for fear of algorithmic interference in this broadcast and its audience, with the entire focus of the mass media on a virus and a prescription as to how to deal with that virus. How the page was turned so comprehensively that no one talked about the virus anymore, because everyone had moved on to the next thing. The next thing was the Ukraine. Do you remember all the lights, blue and yellow? You remember the corner flags at football matches, blue and yellow? You remember the vigils and all the paraphernalia of collection, the state propaganda on a hitherto unforeseen level behind a narrative about a conflict in which far, far away 2 other countries were locked in combat. Everyone had to worship at the altar of the Ukraine and of President Zelensky. The ease with which it was done was simply awesome for someone like me, long experienced in political communications, and the difficult task of pushing boulders uphill for almost all of my life on almost everything that I have fought for and believed in. The tremendous choreography of it all was dispassionately something to wonder at. And then, how quickly that page too was turned. Zelensky became a forgotten man, the Ukraine a forgotten conflict, as 4 weeks ago only, the entire world was turned to face the issue of Gaza, the Palestinians, and the State of Israel. Another foreign country, another clash between foreigners in two foreign countries, Palestine and Israel, suddenly became not just an article of faith for the faithful, but became an existential issue for Western countries, just as the Ukraine had earlier been painted as one, as the virus, in turn, had been painted as one. Now it is existential for us to strain every might and main, to give every dollar we can, send every weapon we have left, and now send our own service personnel into harm's way in the Eastern Mediterranean, and indeed, in the case of the US Delta Force, at least literally into the fighting in Gaza. And it's said that there's a D notice on the British media asking them not to mention the fact that British Special Forces, it's been said the SAS, are actually fighting in Gaza. How did all of this happen? And happen with such ease and such overwhelming propaganda power? As someone who has been fighting the Palestinian corner for more than 50 years of my life, again, I have to take my hat off at the skill with which the British establishment has convinced a big section of the British population that a group of people who, in the lifetime of many of you watching this show now, not ancient history, murdered British soldiers, hanging them by piano wire in the orange groves of Jaffa, blowing them to pieces in the King David Hotel, almost 100 of them, in one single terrorist attack. How a group of people who tried multiple times to murder Winston Churchill when he was fighting Adolf Hitler, who tried to blow up Parliament and came closer than Guy Fawkes was able to do, who tried to blow up the Foreign Office and were stymied only by the sharp eyes of a Spitfire pilot from the Royal Air Force who spotted the threat. A group of people who murdered in cold blood on the street the special envoy of the United Nations, Count Bernadotte of Sweden. A group of people who murdered a man from the House of Lords, Lord Moyne. A group of people, the Jabotinsky, Begin, Shamir, Netanyahu gang, that you would have thought would have been anathema to the British establishment, British political public opinion. By the way, you know that the royal family never once went to Israel until just a few years ago when the doltish, now King Charles, actually visited the King David Hotel, where all those British people had been slaughtered by the political movement now in power in the State of Israel. You'd think it would be a tough ask to persuade British people that this was the gang of killers that we needed to get behind. But it appears to have worked. You get sacked from your job for tweeting support for a ceasefire. The BBC, Joe Coburn, tells you that the whole of the Jewish community in Britain is made anxious and fearful by people in a railway station in London demanding a ceasefire in a murderous, genocidal frenzy of violence. She forgot to mention that actually almost all the people in the railway station protesting for a ceasefire were themselves Jewish. The BBC gets to speak for Jewish people, you see. And the thousands of Jews in Britain and America denouncing Netanyahu and this murder spree are not allowed to speak at all. They are airbrushed from the picture. The British Home Secretary, that's the Minister of the Interior, very powerful minister in Britain, a woman called Suella Braverman, tells us with no hint of conflict of interest that her husband is an ardent Zionist and close family members of her are fighting now in Gaza with the Israel Defense Force. She maybe should have said so when she declared it a crime to wear or wave a Palestinian flag on the streets of London. Maybe she should have said that somebody else should have announced that henceforth wearing a keffiyeh, as hundreds of thousands of young people do in the United Kingdom, could now get you arrested as some kind of manifestation of hate. Now, that's a measure of how the British state, its broadcaster, every single one of its newspapers, especially the rancid rag called The Guardian, that once built an audience on its sensibility to the Palestinian feelings, Palestinian suffering, Palestinian history, has now wheeled and turned and is now firmly in the Netanyahu camp, like every other British newspaper. It's quite a performance. If you're a recording artist, you'll be cancelled if you breathe a word of sympathy for the Palestinian people, who are, as I speak, on the receiving end of a genocidal mass murder of a kind not seen since the Second World War, not seen since the uprising of the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto, who decided that they could no longer breathe under this Nazi persecution, murder, hunger, thirst, and with no medicine or medical care to take care of them when they fell. The Jews decided that because they could not breathe, they must revolt, and wrote their name into history as the bravest, most magnificent humans, mensch, who would rather die on their feet than to live on their knees. The same thing happened in Treblinka. Same thing happened in Auschwitz. Jewish heroes who could not breathe chose instead to revolt. That's what the Palestinians did on October the 7th. They're fighters, not ISIS, but in the words of the Financial Times, more Viet Cong than ISIS. Broke out of their concentration camp, revolted because they could not breathe. And now 10,000 Palestinians lay slaughtered on the bitter earth of the Gaza Strip, 25 square kilometers. More explosive power has been dropped on them in 4 weeks than was dropped on Hiroshima in the nuclear attack in August of 1945. The only difference being Hiroshima was 10 times bigger. And you could, if you were quick enough, actually run away from Hiroshima, from Gaza. There is no escape. A Hiroshima has been dropped on a land where more than half of the people are children. Half of the people are women, Half of the people are children, and nearly 70% of those who have been slaughtered have been women and children. Sometimes a 2-for-1. If you murder a pregnant woman and they have to cut the fetus from the dead mother, most likely you'll have got 2 for the price of 1. The digital spokesman of Benjamin Netanyahu published online a picture of a row of dead babies. And the words that he spoke should chill your blood. We have done the world a service, he said, in destroying these little ticking time bombs who would have grown up to be a threat to the whole world. That's the spokesman of the Israeli Prime Minister. If you go beneath to the TikTokers and the common man and woman, 83% of whom are in full support of the complete extermination of the Palestinian population in Gaza. God bless the 17% who are not. If you go underneath the stones, the rocks, and see the racist, genocidal filth which oozes, trust me, I look at it so you don't have to. Because you'll lose your faith in the human race, that I promise you, if you dig as deep as I have been digging this last few weeks. Anyway, it's about to take a very dramatic turn. Following the double genocidal attack on a camp called Jabalya, which I first visited in 1980, long before anything called Hamas ever existed. I came home so filled with my pride in the nobility, dignity, steadfastness, and resistance of the Jabalya camp. I actually called my house Jabalya when I got home. Please don't carpet bomb it. An entirely innocent family live in it now and have no doubt changed its name. Then the Israelis occupied the Jabalya camp. I came upon, with a United Nations official driving me, I came upon on a later date, when I was a member of Parliament. I spoke about it in Parliament, you can check it. I came upon a group of Palestinian women in Jabalya camp being forced to clean the road with toothbrushes on their knees, being forced by heavily armed Israeli soldiers, Druze soldiers, border guards they were called, forcing a large group of women to sweep the road with toothbrushes. And suddenly, me, a British member of Parliament, and my colleague from the United Nations itself, I still remember him, looked like Anthony Quinn. We stood there, and the Israeli troops didn't give a damn that we were watching it. Anyway, it was the last straw. The double genocidal attack on a refugee camp in which now hundreds have been killed and hundreds maimed on a refugee camp was the last straw. If Israel does not cease fire by dawn on Friday, the world, my world, your world, our world will be on fire. At dawn on Friday, all kinds of people are going to join the war. And if the American aircraft carriers and warships and the British warships and the French and the Dutch, for God's sake, who knew the Dutch had a navy, Marines, who knew? If they join in defense of Netanyahu's apartheid state, then the world will be at war. From all parts of the West Asia, weapons in very, very large numbers, of very great potency, will set Israel on fire from north to south. They've got air raid shelters. I hope they get to them in time. But Israel will be on fire at dawn on Friday. If the United States and its satrapies then choose to join the war openly, they too will be at war with West Asia. Has the ring of 1984 about it, doesn't it? And the Straits of Hormuz will be closed. No oil will flow. No wheel will turn. A state of war between the United States and Iran will exist. And Iran has very powerful and determined friends. So, I'm sorry to be the bearer of that exceedingly bad news. With a bit of luck, we'll get a show in on Sunday, but no one can guarantee anything after that. It's the mother of all talk shows. A big thanks to the people who support me on the Patreon page. I really have come to depend on the income from that. It costs £1 a week, not even the price of a cup of coffee in an insalubrious cafe. If you think you could stretch to that, please support me on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. Now, the MOATS team have added a tiered system on my Patreon page where you can become an official MOATS graduate. How about that? I speak as someone who graduated from nowhere, from the factory floor in Michelin. But you can become a MOATS graduate and legend. You can give a regular donation to support the show and my work. You can now upgrade from a mere Patreon to a MOATS graduate at £10 a month, as opposed to £5 a month, I think it is. And you can receive official MOATS legend status for £20.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, we've got a poll running. 23,000 people have voted in it already. Is it justified to murder dozens of civilians to kill one Hamas commander? As a matter of fact, it's now hundreds of dead civilians, and they didn't kill a Hamas commander who was not there, thus making it absolutely unarguably a war crime, at least according to Scott Ritter, who knows a thing or two about what constitutes a war crime. Is it justified to murder dozens of civilians to kill one Hamas commander? Yes or no? Some people have voted yes. I hope they have the courage to call the show and argue their case. If you're in the UK or Ireland, it's 08081965522. 08081965522. If you're in the US or Canada, it's +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. It won't cost you a thing from the UK, Ireland, US, or Canada. If you're outside of those two places, though, it is 44203 966 2625. 44203 966 2625. Get voting on my poll. Our first guest of this evening needs little introduction, but I'd like to say that he comes from the camps, the refugee camps in Gaza. He rose to be the most famous journalist in the entire Arab world. There was a time when he was the last journalist standing in the Arab world, although that thankfully has changed, and now there are many, many heroic Arab journalists, particularly in Palestine. He, for a time, was called the last Arab, but he isn't that now either. There are many Arabs now, Arabs to be proud of, as I know he is. Abdel Bari Atwan, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. Let's take a moment to talk about the camp that we both know so well, Jabalya camp. Describe it and describe what happened to it, please.
You know, Jabalya camp is one of the poorest camps in Gaza Strip. And, it is really, just full of children, full of mothers, full of ladies. So I was really shocked when the Israeli bombed this camp. It is very narrow alleyways, and the people are really, in one room, you will find 10 people living there or a little bit less. So it is a torture to be in these camps, but the people are really trying to survive despite the Israeli sanction, the Israeli cage, as you mentioned it several times, George. They try to survive at least, but they have full faith that one day they will go back to Palestine. They will go back to their towns, to their villages, to their, village. Yes. So in Palestine, real Palestine. Personally, I am from Ashdod, which is on the Mediterranean. It's now the biggest city on Israel, as they call it. So people are really suffering. Imagine 500 people were bombed by the Israeli. Simply, as you mentioned, George, they were trying to kill one man from Hamas. We don't know whether this is true or not. I believe it is fabricated in order to justify this massacre. So it is not only Jabalya, it's also Nusayrat, which is another camp in the middle of Gaza, was bombed. It is also in Bridge. It is also in Gaza itself, and Salah ad-Din streets. So massacres everywhere. Yet, to be honest, I stopped trying to look at the television, because every time I do, there are massacres. Hospitals, imagine that. Al-Ahli hospital were bombed by the Israeli, and about, again, 400 people were killed. Most of them were children. I couldn't look at the bodies, at the corpse of the children, or babies actually, massacred by the Israeli, whether in Jabalya, whether in Ahli hospitals, or anywhere in the Gaza Strip. It is death everywhere. I lost tens of my families there. So whenever I call or I receive a call, the internet was cut off completely. But when they have 5 minutes, they call me and they tell me every time there is very, very sorry news, honestly, about death, which is a disaster by all means. Why they are doing that? Where the international community, where the free world, where the American, where the values of human rights, which they were lecturing us all the time. You Arabs, you don't understand. You Muslims, you don't want to understand. We are the heroes of the free words and the values of human rights. So look, I'm really shocked. What happened to the West? George, what happened to the West? Why until now, after 27 days of bombardment of Gaza, which it is 350 square miles, why until now the Americans saying no ceasefire, Britain saying no ceasefire, Germany saying no ceasefire? What it means? It means, to give the Israeli the green lights to kill, to massacre all of Gaza. They couldn't transfer them to Sinai in Egypt and actually clear the Gaza Strip completely from them. Now they want to kill them. So this is the story, and nobody is caring. Nobody is paying attention at all. Hospital run out of medicine. A cousin who is a doctor told me we actually practice operation on people and children without anesthetic, simply because there is no anesthetic, and poor people, poor patient crying from pain. Other things, the Israeli are telling the hospitals, no, you should clear out completely. We don't want you here. We don't want anybody here. What they are going to do with the patient people? What they are going to do with those people who are suffering, who are injured, who are actually, have a lot of diseases? Where to go there? To throw them where? Have you ever seen somebody saying you have to clear the hospital from patient? The Israeli are doing it. Have you ever seen, there are people or army or civilized country, the only democracy in the Middle East, bombing hospital? Have you bombing people who took refuge in the hospitals, on the schools of the UNRWA, United Nations organization? I am really asking. I'm really shocked, George. Honestly, I never expected that. I never thought I will live to the day to see the hospital bombed. The patients are thrown out of their beds. So tell me, have you? We are maybe close. We are the same age. Have you ever heard of something like this?
Well, what I never heard of was an occupier which calls itself the victim. And in that, I share it with the great Israeli writer Gideon Levy, whose words I've just quoted. Never in history has there been an occupier that tried to portray itself as the victim. We'll come back to the West, Abdel Bari, but I want to talk about the East. I want to talk about what the Eastern governments are doing. The Israelis have offered Egypt to pay off their debt, which is $20 billion, if they will take all the population of Gaza. But of course, the population of Gaza will not leave Gaza in any case to become refugees again, but it's an extraordinary offer that they made to them. The Turkish government is still allowing Israel's oil supplies. 40% of Israel's oil is supplied by Turkey from Azerbaijan in a pipeline across Turkey. Could be switched off at any moment. And whilst little countries in Latin America, thousands of miles away, are kicking out Israeli ambassadors, breaking diplomatic relations with Israel, Colombia, Chile, Bolivia, there are still Arab countries with Israeli ambassadors sitting in their capitals and still full political and diplomatic relations with them. So we'll come back to the West, but what about the East?
Yes. To be honest, you describe what's happening among these rotten government in the Middle East, because those people are under the American domination, under the American pressure. Look at Turkey, for example. When they tried to rebel against the American, what they did to them, they destroyed their currency, the lira there. So the same thing happened in Egypt when the Egyptian actually say, no, I can't do that. They punish them. They stopped financial aids to them, and they actually create internal problems to depose them. But they shouldn't actually submit to these American pressure. They should do as the South American honorable leaders there did. They said to the Israeli, you are a criminal. You are killing people. You are massacring people. We cannot have you here. Go home. That's what happened. Even it's not their home. It is my home. It is our Palestinian home. We are there. We were kicked from there 75 years ago. We were forced to leave. So, but now there is awakening, George. There is awakening in the Arab streets, in the Arab people now revolting. And I am telling you, Gaza will change the map of the Middle East. The barbaric way of treating the Gazan people, the massacring them, ethnic cleansing them, will change the whole of the Middle East. In 1948, Israel was established on our account, and the Arab regimes actually sided with the British in that time, British colonizers at that time. And then they were military coup. I expect the same thing could be repeated. People are so angry, so frustrated. There are thousands of people actually massed on the Jordanian border with Iraq, and they want to go and storm the Jordanian-Israeli borders in order to fight with the Palestinians. So the Africans, God bless them, kicked the French out of Africa, and Burkina Faso and Mali, and so in Niger, so simply because they could not live with exploitation of their wealth and send it to France. The same thing will happen in the Middle East. Now people realize that these regimes like the African corrupt regimes, and they should go. So I expect revolutions like what happened after 1948 Nakba. So now the Middle East is boiling. And the Israeli actually responsible for this. When they signed Oslo Agreement 30 years ago on the loan of the Middle and of the White House, and offering the Palestinians this kind of agreement, offering the Palestinian a homeland, a state. 30 years of negotiation and no state at all, but more massacres against the Palestinians and a plan to transfer the 2 million of Gazan to Sinai. Egyptian government could not take them, said, no, why shall we take 2,000 people? Why should we uproot them completely from their territories, from their Gaza? And Gaza actually is not a paradise. Gaza, is a cage, as you mentioned it several times. But despite that, people would like to stay in Gaza. They don't want to leave Gaza at all. They don't want to go anywhere on earth. And I have a cousin there, and I phoned him. He's very intellectual. He said, listen, the Israeli wanted to do two things by their bombardment. One thing is to release the hostages, as they call them, and the second thing is to destroy Hamas. So they killed more than 8,500 people on Gaza in order to achieve those aims. And they did not at all. Did not, as you mentioned, half of them children, babies. So, and the other thing is they want to transfer the Gazan people to where? Because there are gas underneath Gaza, and they want to exploit this gas. It is greedy. So I believe the Middle East will be changed, and I wouldn't be surprised if this actually war enlarged and other people join the Hamas in this war, like Hezbollah, like the popular Hashd, like, for example, the Yemenis and many people, Syrian. So is the Israeli will be happy after that? Blinken, who is visiting the Israeli, saying, I am not visiting Israel as a foreign minister of United States. I am visiting Israel as a Jew. Imagine that. You're supposed to be the American foreign minister. You're supposed to be belonging to a modern country, a free country. Why did you characterize it as a sectarian job for you? Let us live together without saying this is Jew, this is Muslim, this is Christian. And there is a chance to, if we apply the international legality, but never. Finally, I would like to say this in this part. I'm shocked to see that in Western world, Western countries, I mean governments, saying that the Israeli has the right of defense to defend themselves. To defend yourself, it was translated and supported by this government in Europe and the United States. It was translated to commit massacres, to commit ethnic cleansing. So this is self-defense, to kill children. What did the children do to the Israelis? Did they kill the Israelis? The babies killed the Israeli and other things. Did you give the German Nazi the right of self-defense, for example, when they occupied France and occupied other European countries? Tell me, so why don't you give the Palestinian the right of self-defense? Why you don't help them? Why you don't help those civilians? Why the human aids was delayed for more than 3 weeks before it's reached Gaza and reached the people? Honestly, George, I'm telling you, wallah, there is no water. Wallahi, there is no water. There is no food. There is no medicine. Nothing in Gaza. And they are talking about human rights, and they are talking about dignity, and they are talking about justice.
Abdel Bari Atwan, thanks as always. I fear we'll have to be talking again in the very near future. Abdel Bari Atwan, the most famous of all Arab journalists, and you can feel his pain, I think, in that interview. Let me take a quick break, and then it's your calls to the hour. You don't get to call me far right. You don't get to call me that on my own show. A lifelong socialist, the leader of a socialist party, the Workers' Party of Britain, with an Indonesian wife, with 5 mixed-race children, with a record of fighting racism all of my life, representing more people of colour in the British Parliament than anyone in history by a country mile. You don't get to call me far right. These kind of idiotic insults tossed around by infantile leftists who think that anyone to the right of them is a fascist, is a racist. They are the cause of the crashing and burning of what used to be called the left. They are the cause of it. They have discredited leftism with their foolish, idiotic isms and ists and smears that emanate from them like a bad smell.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, get voting on my poll. You can vote on Telegram, t.me/George Galloway. You can vote on Twitter or X on my Twitter account. And you can vote on the YouTube community poll. 24,000 people have voted now. Here's an email from Ben. Dear George, hypothetically, if Benjamin Netanyahu and Sleepy Joe were to pass away tomorrow, would this all end? Or would there be deeper, darker powers behind the scenes encouraging this mayhem to continue? Many thanks, Ben. Big thanks to you, Ben, and all my Patreon supporters on whom I am reliant. I hope you'll follow me on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. No, it would not end because it has existed for 75 years, and I've given you my own personal experience. 1980, 43 years ago, was the first time I was in Gaza. It was the first time I was in the Jabalya camp. And it was under ruthless, illegal military occupation, then as now, 43 years later. And so the people who were murdered in the attack on Jabalya were not just the children, but the grandchildren of the people that I met there. in 1980. Call from Australia. It's the middle of the night there. Better go to that now. Sean on the line from Australia, but on Palestine. Sean, what would you like to say?
Mr. Galloway, it's always a joy to speak to you.
Thank you, sir. Nice to speak to you.
Yeah, I hope you're keeping well. And just coming back to what you're saying about your Patreons, anyone who isn't a Patreon, I'd strongly encourage them to do so, because there's some magnificent content on there, and I'd strongly recommend it. Couple of things, well, a few things, if you give me the time, mate. Firstly, I wanted to touch base on how disgusted I was with Celtic Football Club. You know, a club with rich history, formed from poor people, formed from the church. Banning cancelling the Green Brigade season tickets is an absolute outrage. Secondly,
well, just before you move on, Sean,
yeah, go on, mate.
Sean, just before you move on from that, because it's an important issue you've raised. Celtic Football Club, my team, was founded from the impoverished immigrant masses from Ireland who had come to Scotland, amongst whom were my own grandparents. The notion of that football club cancelling the tickets, season tickets, of 1,000 supporters because they waved Palestinian flags is so repugnant that I feel it will be impossible for them to hold the line on it. And I want everybody to say in any way that they can what you have just said. Sean, today, the Roman Catholic Church of the Holy Family in Gaza was struck by a missile. The church was full of worshippers at prayer. The Holy Family Church. Do the Celtic board know that? Do they think that Brother Walfrid, who founded Celtic, would be unmoved by that attack on the Holy Family Church in Gaza, or on the Gazan people in the hospitals, clinics, refugee camps? Do they think that Brother Walfrid would be moved by that? Moved maybe to wave a flag in support of it? Or would Brother Walfrid back the board in effectively banishing from Celtic Park 1,000 supporters for waving Palestinian flags? Go on, Sean.
He'd be spinning in his grave, George, I tell you. Just another thing I'm not surprised about, but disgusted. I don't know if you've heard of that October Declaration. Collection of B and C grade celebrities and stooges and so-called academics, putting their name to this so-called October Declaration. Outrageous. Just a couple more things, George, quickly. I just wanted to say, as you've said many times, it's not a matter of left or right anymore. It's good versus evil. And, this life's very short, and it's a test, And, we're going to all meet our maker at some stage and ask the question, what did you do? And it's up to everyone now to show a bit of backbone and say, you know what, I'm going to stand up and do the right thing. And just finally, on a positive note, finally, mate, I genuinely think that this is a turning point in history. And I believe that the Israeli state's brutality and barbarity, I think it'll ironically prove to be their Achilles heel. Because these people are indefatigable. They will not leave their land. And this brutality will go down in infamy. And I, for one, I'm not going to be silent. I'm going to stand up. I don't care who I upset, who friends I lose. I couldn't care less, because I'm going to do the right thing. And God bless you, George, and I hope to catch up in December, mate.
God bless you, Sean Kidden in Australia. Bless you. Email from Campbell. Everything David Icke has been saying for the last 30 years is coming to pass. May God bless him. I hope you read this out, George, because I find you also as a man of truth. May God bless you and your family. On line 2, is Annan in Nottingham, but also on Palestine. Annan, welcome to the show.
Hi, George. I've been watching you since you slaughtered the Senate and took it to the cleaners. What an articulate man you are, George.
Thank you.
May Allah Ta'ala grant you strength in this cause. At the moment, currently, the narrative is the right to defend. Piers says it, right to defend. It's like they've been programmed, no matter what happens, it's their right to defend. Doesn't make sense. What about the right to defend for Palestine before the 7th of October? Where was their right? When they came into Al-Aqsa, when they killed innocent people, where was their right then? How can it be that the most sophisticated state, who has drones flying all over the city, they would kill a child throwing a stone over the fence, but they did not know the Hamas was paragliding in? Why did it take so long to respond? Did they need time to make it fit their agenda? Are they not noticing what the hostages are saying? Are they that stupid? While the hostages are having a Michelin-star breakfast, they're starving Palestinians and depriving them of food. Where's the justice in that? It doesn't make sense. The way I see it is what they want to do is wipe out the younger generation so there will be no uprising against them. Nobody realizes this is the bigger goal for them. They're not interested in Hamas. They never have been. They need a reason to eliminate the uprising. It's like they tried it in the Farouk time. Look where it got them. And if an average human is being provoked...
Annan, first of all, the people who are being held hostage in a tunnel in Gaza are not getting a Michelin-style breakfast. We have to retain the human empathy with all people held in hostage. And that includes the thousands of Palestinian prisoners. And therefore, it must also include the Israeli prisoners that were taken on the 7th of October. Secondly, as a matter of legal fact, Israel does not have the right to defend itself against the people it illegally occupies. Point that Abdel Bari made there in passion, let me make more dispassionately. The Nazi occupiers of France had no right to defend themselves legally against the people of France whom they occupied. The legal right belongs with the occupied people, not the occupier. The occupier's legal obligation is to stop the occupation. That's what it's legally required to do, and it has refused to do, and the so-called international law hasn't even tried to force them to. So this meaningless, mindless mantra from Piers Morgan and others, right to defend, at the very least, if Israel has a right to defend itself, so does the Palestinian have a right to defend themselves. Who can dispute that? But what we want is a ceasefire now. What we want is an end to the siege now, before dawn on Friday, before we all go up in smoke. And thank you for that call. Email from Sam. What do you think about Labour MPs calling pro-Palestine marches Jew-hating fests? What's happened to the Labour Party, George? Long-time listener, Sam. The Labour Party is dead. Anyone with any self-respect has to leave it now. They know that in their heart. They know that in their conscience. Go and do something else, somewhere else. Form another party, join my party, form a coalition or alliance of parties. Do something else. Stop sitting in a party that says and acts on lies like that. They destroyed the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, precisely because they knew that a moment such as this would one day come. And how could they tolerate Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of the opposition, still less as the Prime Minister of the country, given his stand on this question and others. So they destroyed your leader. They've expelled thousands of you, disproportionately Jewish members, by the way. They are making it illegal for you to even call for a ceasefire, never mind for justice. Nelson Mandela would have to be expelled from today's Labour Party. The Pope would have to be expelled from today's Labour Party. Gideon Levy of the Haaretz would have to be expelled from today's Labour Party. Why are you still in it? Do what your conscience has been telling you to do. For God's sake. Joe's in Detroit on Palestine. Let's hear from Joe. Go ahead, Joe.
Good evening, George, and God bless you for being a light in the world in these dark times.
Thank you.
Just wanted to say, I've been watching this regional war that it seems like we're seeing the beginning of develop my whole life. 9/11 was my first day of preschool, and since then I've watched untold millions die in genocidal wars across the regions, and those who survived have lived in absolute misery and poverty. And, you know, this has been going on for so much longer than that. My father, he was born in the United Arab Republic in Syria in a much different time since then now. And in his whole life, he saw terrible wars of genocide and of the blackest reaction sweep the region. But I do think that the pendulum is finally swinging and that people have nothing to lose and they will never give up their land or their dignity, and that the pendulum is really swinging at this time. And, you know, my uncle, he was born in Jerusalem before the State of Israel was founded in 1946. And if the imperialists don't drown the world in a nuclear holocaust, I believe that he will live to see the liberation of Palestine.
Well, that call was pretty much perfect, Joe. I'm not going to try to add to it. Give your father my best regards, please, and all your relatives in America or still in the region. I'm not as confident as you, but I am confident that the pendulum has swung. I don't actually see not only how Israel recovers from this, but I don't actually see how the United States, how Britain, these two in particular, I don't see how their governments survive this. I don't see, having taken us into one disaster after another, how they can continue to stand. Joe in Detroit, thank you. Email from Thomas. The West, i.e. America, UK, EU, should hang their head in shame for what they are allowing to take place in Gaza. Anyone not calling them out should hang their heads in shame. Regards, Thomas. Let's take a call from England. Lincolnshire, Islam, online 2, on Palestine. Go ahead, Islam, what would you like to say?
Hi, George. Really good to speak to you. I just wanted to make a few points. Firstly, just to thank you, though, for all the support you give. I think it's really helpful. People are understandably down, and you give that boost of hope. So thank you, first of all. The main point I wanted to raise is these European governments and the Western governments are all vetoing the ceasefire and holding back and really just backing Israel with the aim of aiding Israel. But what they need to understand is they're shooting themselves in the foot because, as you can see, the Islamic world, the more time goes on, or the Arab world, they're reuniting. You've got the Iranians now visiting the Arabs, and this is the Gulf Arabs, not just North African or Levantine Arabs. They're visiting the Gulf Arabs, where they've had this huge hatred for a few years. You've got the Chinese saying they'll back Iran. You've got the Russians, of course, they'll step in. They stepped in Syria, and they would do it again, I think, in a certain limited context. And so they're shooting themselves in the foot if they think they're helping Israel in this way. It's going to backfire. The second point is that, and this is something I heard the Syrian president say, Bashar al-Assad. He said, the Europeans need to realize they do not exist politically. Just to kind of hold up a mirror and realize you don't exist politically anymore. We wait to see what the US will say, and we know that you will follow suit. Yes, you have economic influence, financial influence, but politically it doesn't really matter. And the longer you hold off, and the longer you are terrified to make decisions that your public want you to make, the more you disappear into the political sunset, let's just call it. And the last point I just wanted to raise and also get your thoughts on is, similarly, the mainstream media has now become irrelevant. I don't think people are really tuning in to get any particular truth from them. And so they've also shot themselves in the foot. If they think they're helping or if they think they're hiding things, it's all going to come out at the end, and the mainstream media has become, to be honest, irrelevant. So it's just those kind of points I wanted to raise and also get your thoughts on it.
Two perfect calls in a row, two calls of perfection in a row. And everything that you said there, I believe, is true. We can argue about the time scale. I just want to make this point. It's an unpopular one. People who were born in Israel, Palestine, have a right to stay there. I'm not one of these, and never have been, that says the people of Israel have to go back to where their parents or grandparents left from to come to Palestine. Israelis have national rights. Everyone who was born there must have the right to stay there, not in someone else's house, not on someone else's land, not at the expense of anyone else, but they have rights. And that's why I advocate for a democratic, secular state called Israel-Palestine, or Palestine-Israel, or just the Holy Land, in which every Jew, Muslim, Christian, and atheist has one vote and has equal rights, one with the other. A constitution which protects their religious rights, their civil rights, their human rights, their political rights. The model has to be the post-apartheid South Africa model. Now, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. And anyone positing any other alternative, like a two-state solution, like the Oslo agreements, have an obligation to put that on the table, not to just utter it as a mantra, but to show us, where is this Palestinian state of which you speak, signed for on the lawn of the White House in the Oslo Accords, but never happened. 30 years later, never happened. And the land on which the Palestinian state was supposed to be built is now paved with Israeli settlements, with hundreds of thousands of people in them. Separate roads, checkpoints, and Gaza is being obliterated, exterminated as we speak. Where is your two-state solution? I believe that Nelson Mandela was right when he was asked by the white people in the Orange Free State after liberation, can we have the Orange Free State as a white state? Mandela answered, we don't believe in white states or black states. We intend to build a democratic state where every person, whatever color they are, is the equal one of the other. Islam, thank you for a beautiful call. Email from Cal. How can the United States just watch this massacre sitting there in the Mediterranean whilst Israel butchered the Palestinian people? The world will never forget this. That's from Cal in the UK. Coming up after a short break is the one and only, and I really mean one and only, Larry Johnson. You don't want to miss him. Stay tuned. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Larry Johnson, ex-CIA operative at an undetermined, indeterminate level, but I figure it was something serious. And in the Pentagon and in the US government has learned a thing or two about international politics and security. And therefore he knows that if my prediction of Friday at dawn is correct, we are in for one hell of a shooting match. And I'm very glad he's agreed to share his wisdom and experience with us. Larry, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows, an honoured guest over many years now. Let's have as a hypothesis that I'm right, that the Hezbollah enter the war at dawn on Friday if Israel has not ceased fire. What happens next?
Well, first, let me thank you for your generous comments, my friend. It is always an honor to be with you. Listen, I wake up with a pit in my stomach every morning, just waiting for the world to catch on fire. This is, I don't know if you recall that movie about a hurricane. It was called The Perfect Storm, where 2 or 3 hurricanes all came together and just created a horrific situation that killed people. That's what I think we're about to experience, because we have never in this entire 75 years of Israel's existence experienced anything like what we're seeing now, where the growing unity in both the Arab and Muslim world, and even outside of the Arab and Muslim world, increased horror in terms of the reaction to the Israelis just wantonly killing women and children without any regard. And then it's compounded by American politicians who are insisting that anybody who's in Palestine, in Gaza, is a Nazi, is the equivalent of a Nazi and should be killed. And so I'm planning to write later tonight an article that will expose this member of Congress who said that, because he's also supporting Ukraine where there actually are real Nazis. Think about that. Yeah. Just the absurdity of it. Yeah. So Hezbollah's ability is, I think, greatly underestimated by many in the world. They keep saying Hezbollah is sort of on the dole with Iran, and that's just nonsense. That was the case through the 1980s into the mid-1990s. But then Hezbollah sort of stood up on its own and began building infrastructure, became a political party, became a social welfare agency, became essentially a government, and created a very stout military force. And it was in 2006 that Israel discovered, much to its chagrin, where they invaded southern Lebanon, and Hezbollah just chewed them up. And Israel essentially lost that engagement with Hezbollah. Now, here we are, 16, 17 years later. Hezbollah stronger now, better equipped, better trained. And Israel, should be praying to God that Hezbollah does not enter the fray. But I think you're right, that if this killing of the civilians does not stop, then the Muslims, Shia and Sunni alike, are going to feel compelled to rise up in their defense.
And of course, Hezbollah is an independent force, but if the United States, off its aircraft carriers, begin bombing Hezbollah and bombing Lebanon, other people are then going to join in quite quickly, aren't they?
Well, yes, and we had a baseball player by the name of Yogi Berra, and he always said something like, "It's deja vu all over again." So the Americans have forgotten what happened in 1983 when Ronald Reagan put battleships off the coast of Lebanon, and we decided it was going to be a good idea to shell Hezbollah positions in the Bekaa Valley. Well, what happened? Hezbollah punched back through the skill of Imad Mughniya, blew up a Marine barracks, killing over 250 Marines. And then a few months later, 4 or 5 months later, in October, blew up the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. What was it about that we didn't learn? If we're going to start throwing shells at Hezbollah, Hezbollah is not going to curl up in a fetal position and start whimpering like some beaten dog. They're going to fight back, and they're going to hurt the United States. They will kill diplomats. They will kill military personnel. They will hit infrastructure. And, they're not doing it because they hate our freedom. They're doing it because we struck the first blow.
The United States has, for bizarre reasons, illogical set of decisions, forces all over the Middle East who are as isolated as any Benghazi embassy ever was. The U.S. forces in Iraq, for example, are at the mercy of a horde of millions. The U.S. base in Syria at the oil fields is completely at the mercy of whomsoever decides to attack it. American soldiers are in harm's way right now. Do the American people know it? Have they agreed to it?
No, absolutely. That's one of the big lies that's going on back here. I checked in with a buddy of mine who's still in the military, in the intelligence business. I said, "Hey, are things getting better or worse?" And he said this morning. He said, "Worse. Every U.S. base in Iraq, in Syria, and some down into Eritrea in the Horn of Africa are getting shelled consistently, hit with drones, and they may get hit with bigger missiles." So it's likely that the United States has taken casualties, and they're not reporting it, just like Israel has been reluctant to report its casualties from its ground invasion. So Americans just, we like to watch these televised wars where we get to see the explosions and listen to the sounds, but we don't actually have to experience the horror of it firsthand. And that only starts sinking in when the bodies start coming back. And then you have to deal with grieving relatives. But it's one thing, they're not paying attention. And the Iran has a lot of room. Iran has been hit. America has attacked Iranian interests. And Iran has good motive, ample motive to want to strike back. And I think they've been sort of biding their time. That's why I think, as you correctly note, Friday could be a very pivotal time, depending upon what Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, has to say.
The United States Delta Force, we know because crazy Joe Biden took a picture of himself with them and published it. The United States Delta Force is in Israel. There are many who say, I can't confirm it myself, maybe you can or not, the Delta Force is in Gaza, certainly at the fence, if not inside the strip. Why would the U.S. get directly involved in a conflict such as this?
Yeah, so that's the area I used to work with, and I actually worked with those particular units over a 23-year period. So they are called into there's a war plan, if you will, a plan for responding to the capture of hostages. So the Delta Force, at a minimum, would be there to consult, provide advice to the Israelis. It's unlikely that they would get involved with a direct assault on any particular location unless they had confirmed intelligence that there was, in fact, an American hostage there. So that is their mission. Now, we're not seeing the flow of what I'd call conventional forces. This at this point, it appears from what I've been able to see in public, confined to the special operations community. It also could potentially include the SEALs. But as you correctly noted, Biden had a happy snap photo with a couple of members of Delta Force standing there, and then they tried to block out their faces. So there was word circulating through. Doug McGregor said he had been told that some members of Delta had accompanied the Israelis on an initial reconnaissance mission last week, and that there were casualties from that, and that very well could be.
It's like a bad movie script. The situation, of course, of the aircraft carriers. Now, I genuinely don't want to see your aircraft carriers sunk, because a lot of poor sailors would lose their lives. But aircraft carriers are very last century things, Larry. They are actually the perfect target. They are the perfect target. Now, I don't know the capability of Hezbollah, but I'm going to take a wild guess from past experience that Hezbollah could put a missile down the chimney of one of your aircraft carriers with absolutely catastrophic results. Are they thinking this through properly in the Pentagon?
Oh, heavens no. Absolutely not. You correctly note that the aircraft carrier today is like the horse cavalry at the start of World War II. They learned in World War I that the horse cavalry was no longer relevant, but they kept it around for another 20 years because it was a jobs program and they had it in the budget. And lo and behold, here we've got these aircraft carriers now, which are these most expensive piece of military equipment ever created. And it takes years to build, and it has absolutely zero defense against hypersonic missiles that we know that Russia has them, we know that China has them, and it's rumored that Iran has them. And if they launch those ships, they're done. And I think that's one of the real risks in the coming, next couple of weeks, that this could get out of hand, that as it expands beyond just Hamas to the Palestine Islamic Jihad, the PIJ, to Hezbollah, to other groups in the region, that they could decide to target those ships. And if they take all they got to do is take one down. They take one down, America is going to be faced with some terrible options.
Now, there's a group that you didn't mention that says they've already fired missiles. This Ansar Allah, the Houthis in Yemen.
The Houthis,
one can assume that they have the missiles they talked of. They said they fired them. I've seen no report of them landing anywhere. Do you think the Yemenis are also a factor in this?
They're a minimal factor. They're more of a distraction for both Israel and the United States. But the war that was going on between the Houthis and the government in Yemen was, a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. China came in, settled that war between them, made them buddies again, got them on the same diplomatic page. But it's still possible that Iran could, if threatened, or if having been hit and deciding to retaliate, could, use the Houthi positions in Yemen as another launch pad to go after Israel. So up to this point, Iran has not inserted itself into the conflict. And I think that's been because both China and Russia have counseled constraint. But with all the bellicose threats coming out of both Israel and the United States demanding an attack on Iran, imagine how you would react in the UK, or my fellow citizens would react in the United States if they've heard day after day cries from Iran to attack America. We must attack America and destroy America. Would we say, oh, they're just kidding?
No, I think the Iranians know that there's no kidding involved. That's the big enchilada, Larry, isn't it? A war with Iran, which is itself militarily very powerful, and which has quite unprecedented statement China made last week, appearing to be a guarantor of Iran's national sovereignty, independence, interests, and so on. That's when it could go global, isn't it? If America attacks Iran, what if China attacks the rest of us in defense of Iran and takes Taiwan as a bonus?
Yeah. In fact, let's go back to starting in 2017, Iran began coordinating with China and Russia on conducting joint military exercises, joint naval exercises. The first one took place in February of 2019. The reason I say it started in 2017, I know from my own experience that when we do these kinds of military exercises, the planning for it, what they call planning conference, starts at least 18 months out. So that, they don't just wake up one morning and go, hey, let's get a bunch of ships together and sail around. So over the last 4 years, since 2019, Iran has had Russia and China exercising alongside it. And I think you put your finger exactly on the heart of the matter. China and Russia have given assurances to Iran saying, okay, look, be patient. Don't escalate this too quick. But if they attack you, we will have your back. We will support you. And unlike promises from the United States where, if the U.S. tells you that they've got your back, you better be alarmed. You might be sexually assaulted. But when Russia and China tell you this, those are promises you can count on. And that's where this is headed. Because Nikki Haley, one of the aspiring candidates for the Republican nomination, she was saying, we got to hit Iran. I mean, and Lindsey Graham, Senator Richard Blumenthal on the Democrat side. It is bipartisan craziness over here in the land of the free, home of the brave. It's nuts.
Thank you for your wise counsel, as always, Larry Johnson, a really treasured guest on the Mother of All.
Thanks, my friend.
Let's see how the poll is going. 25,000 people have voted, and 2% on Telegram say that the Israeli bombing of the refugee camp was justified. 8% on Twitter say so, and 8% on the YouTube community poll say so. Meaning that 98, 92, and 92% of the votes cast say it is simply unjustified. Quick break, then it's your show, all the way to the end. Stay tuned.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. you're being thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got that on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
So if you become a patron, which will cost you less than the price of a cup of tea in a downmarket cafe per week, you get free my Killing Kelly film and free my Killings of Tony Blair. Two great films, if I say so myself, and they come free, gratis, when you join me on patreon.com/George Galloway. Come on, you can afford the price of a cup of tea to support the work I'm doing. Some comments from my patrons. Tim says, Tim's a new patron. Perfect lesson in how to greatly improve Hamas recruitment. What does Israel think all those affected by the death and destruction raining down on them will do? Be nice and move on, or perhaps just seek retribution? Very, very good point, Tim. Another new patron is Noz. Can't see Noz's... yeah, here we are. What we know in this case is a clear-cut apartheid regime operating at will and massacring at will, and as a cherry on their rotten cake, smearing the innocent lives with total lies about them being terrorists. Very, very well said. Slaughtered and then slandered. John C. is a MOATS graduate. That's the higher level of patron. Thanks, John. This action is not justified, but pure evil. Words fail me that the USA and the West stand by and let the murder of innocent Palestinian men, women and children be carried out in the name of revenge, because that is what it is. And a MOATS legend, the highest level you can get, Angus Thompson, says none of this can be justified. And I think this shows all of us what kind of leadership we have in the West. Do you think any of these morons acting as politicians in the West will keep their positions if we make it to the end of this conflict? Well, I hope not, Angus. None of them deserve to. That is for sure. So please look for me on patreon.com/George Galloway and give me your support, please. Khalil is in Jordan on Palestine. Khalil, welcome to the show.
Hello, good evening, George. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, very good, thank you. What would you like to say?
First of all, I can't, if I wanted to spend some time to say how much we admire you and me personally, how much you mean to me, I will spend maybe the entirety of the show. So I'll cut it short and say, like,
thank you.
You mean so much to us all in this region. And I have a few points, like 4 points, if I may. Do I have the time to say them back to back?
Yes,
or,
yes, for sure, for sure.
Okay,
no,
okay.
Go ahead.
So the first point is a very specific one regarding Egypt, and I don't know if that term that is used. Like, do you think the president of Egypt is, I don't want to be disrespectful, but like a wheeling and dealing, and is there something that's going to be at the expense of people of Gaza taking place? This is the first point.
I hope
the
not.
Second point is that,
I hope not. I don't regard them as a Hosni Mubarak, put it that way. I hope not. And I know that the Egyptian people would not want that. They would not want their president to sell out Palestine for $20 billion worth of debt. Better to rip up the debt. But the whole thing will founder anyway, Khalil, because the Palestinians will simply refuse to go into the Sinai Desert. You would have to kill them all and carry them there in coffins. They will refuse to become refugees again in another desert. So I think the offer from Israel will be refused by Egypt, but even if it is not refused, it will not work. Go on to your second point, Khalil.
Okay, and the second point is that you've mentioned that you prefer a one-state solution. But if I may, like, we've seen like some video evidence of people, of Israelis, clearly saying that, and I hope no one from your listeners get offended by this, but I'm just going to say with all like sincere intentions, that they see Muslims and Christians and people of other faiths as their servants, and if they refuse to be servants, and they need to be wiped out. So do you think even if this happens, it will be peaceful going forward?
Well, of course, the same thing was believed and said by the very highest to the lowest in apartheid South Africa. But the solution I'm proposing can only work if there is a dramatic change in the balance of power in the region and a dramatic change in the political decisions of the politicians in Israel. So I wouldn't rule it out because of the vile, venomous, racist hatred that we can see on TikTok from Israelis. Many Israelis in those circumstances would go away. Many of them have dual passports, dual citizenship. Many of them would go away. They would not want to live in equality with Christians and Muslims. But many would stay, just like many white South Africans stayed. And a rainbow nation was built. You've only got to look at the support for the South African rugby team, multiracial team now, across the whole nation, to see that miracles do happen. And if there's no chance of a miracle in the Holy Land, we're all done for. Point 3, Khalil.
Okay, it's a follow-up to the first one, but it's a very quick one. I wonder if the people in Europe or in the West in general, they don't see the similarity between like how Israel to Judaism is the same.
Oh, I've lost Khalil. Sorry, we've lost Khalil. We'll try and get back to him. Let's go to the next call then. In Melbourne, Australia, Sylvie is on the line. Go ahead, Sylvie.
Well, hello, George. Thank you so much for taking my call. Look, it's a short call, just asking and urging people to go to protests. If there's a protest from your town, in your city, be there, show up, bums on seats. This is what should be happening everywhere. We see huge protests on TV, but not enough people. There should be more. I go every Sunday to a protest outside the library in Melbourne. It's a real effort for me, but I'm there. And I'd just like to see more and more people there. I have friends who say, oh, don't go, it doesn't help, you're powerless. Not true. If there is no other reason to go, you should be there to show the Palestinian people that we know, We care. We support you. We are on your side. I have been stopped in the streets, in the supermarket, by people who have no need to be humble, but who humbly say to me, thank you so much for caring. So all I really want to say now is go, be there, show the government that what we really think, and that we're not going to take this crap any longer. That's it, George.
How beautiful, Sylvie. Sylvie, I'm overcome. I know you should never ask a woman her age, but are you an elderly lady?
George, I'm 78 and I've got a serious breathing problem. I'm a poor old wreck, and I have to stand on my feet for over an hour listening to speeches, and I do it because I care. It keeps me awake at night. I get up at 3 or 4 in the morning to see what's happening. I'm on Twitter all the time. And if I can do it, I watch these idiots on the tram with their stupid phones. I don't know what the hell they're doing, but they're not doing anything that I want to do. If I can get on the internet, if I can find out what's going on in the world, if I can have in my heart at least to think, God, if only I could do something. There are tens of thousands of people out there wasting their time. That's it.
Sylvie, you're an Australian hero, and we'll never forget you. We'll never forget that call. A force of nature. Khalil in Jordan, his phone died, but he's back now. Khalil, point 3 and 4. We just lost it again. Sorry. Tom sends an email. Please can you touch on your thoughts on Donald Trump, if you think he will do what he says he will do when he gets into office? Do you think the Ukraine war wouldn't have happened with him in power? And do you think he will win the next election? I think he will win the next election unless he's terminated with extreme prejudice, and I wouldn't rule that out. I can't see how Joe Biden can possibly be re-elected. It's just impossible to imagine another Joe Biden term. It's actually quite alarming to imagine another Donald Trump term. But better a Donald Trump term than another Joe Biden term. Although, of course, I wouldn't be voting for either of them. I don't believe the Ukraine war would have happened if Donald Trump had still been president. But other wars would probably have happened if Donald Trump had been president. And I must say, his performance in this crisis is utterly contemptible and deplorable. George, you express confidence the US and UK governments will not survive as a result of their countless disasters. But they'll fall to what? The Tories out, but the Tories light will replace them. Not so light. Democrats out, replaced by Republicans. Let's see if I can get that screen moved up a little bit so I can read the rest of that message, which I can't. Something has happened in the mothership. So let me go to the polls. 26,000 now. 395 people have voted, but the balance has not changed. Here's Andrew in Ireland. Democrats out, but replaced by Republicans. Same. Ireland is no better. That's why I refuse to vote anymore. Well, Andrew, I think Ireland's got a bit of a better, wider choice than the United States and Britain, but I've no doubt we'll come to that in due course. Mohammed is in Austria. We try to get calls from all over the world, and lo and behold, Austria just became Australia. Mohammed in Australia, welcome.
Assalamu alaikum, George. Thank you so much for having me.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah barakatuh. What would you like to say?
Just like to thank you for all your efforts, all your coverage, and all your analysis that you provide. Also, just before I begin, I'd love to commend Sylvie as an inspiration to all Australians. She's standing up to injustice.
78-year-old Sylvie, a force of nature.
Yeah, exactly right. George, this war on Palestine, it's impacted, the Arab Muslim community in Australia quite significantly. And unfortunately, our Prime Minister has sided with Israel, despite evidence of him years back criticizing Israel. Seems to be quite hypocritical. We even have video footage of him protesting, demanding justice for the Palestinians and the right for them to have their own state, their own country. So it's quite disappointing, for Australians, especially us here in Sydney, where we're attending protests every week, standing up to this apartheid, this constant bombardment. My question I had for you, George, is regarding the potential involvement of other neighboring countries, and specifically Lebanon, where I'm from. If Israel continues to invade on the ground and continues its relentless bombardment of innocent children, as we see every day, will Hezbollah step in? I saw just previously a little podcast of Norman Finkelstein saying, he mentioned that if they don't step in, they'll seem to be quite weak or hypocritical. I was just wondering what your thoughts on that is, George.
At dawn on Friday, if Israel has not ceased fire, a wider war will commence. With the Fajr prayer, at dawn on Friday, we'll be in a wider regional war if a ceasefire has not occurred before that. Of that, I'm virtually certain. And that regional war can quickly become an even greater conflagration involving all of the superpowers, all of the nuclear-armed powers. Mohammed, thanks for the call. Long time since I spoke in Sydney, but I filled the town hall there, standing room only. Email from Steron. What is the Friday morning that you alluded to at the beginning of the program? Well, there I just have explained. Nick is in Cardiff, again on Palestine. Nick, what would you like to say?
Assalamu alaikum, George. First of all, thank you for your great job. You're amazing, man. You do your job. And we all in a test. In this world, we are in a test. Whether it's me, whether it's you, whether our Prime Minister, whether it's the member of the public, we should stand for the justice. Look, throughout the history, Britain did everything to everywhere, nearly occupied the whole world. If they did anything good anywhere in the world, look, people admire it. If they did anything wrong, even nowadays, our government feels shame on that history they did in the past. So imagine, like, in our future generation, will feel shame on our current governments, which they support the most heinous.
Well, we missed that. We've lost that one. Also, Nick in Cardiff, beautiful words. I'm grateful for them. Insofar as they were directed at me. It's breaking up, Nick, so I'll have to let you go and try and get back to you. This is Murad, a Jordanian from Canada. One thing I want to say, if the US, UK, France are claiming democracy, how about a worldwide electronic vote to stop the war or not? Or simply, is it Palestine or so-called Israel? Let the planet vote. I was giving thought the other day to the demand for a referendum on whether Britain should stand up for the rights of the Palestinian people that we guaranteed them even when we gave their country away in the Balfour Declaration. Everyone focuses on the admittedly extraordinary first part of the Balfour Declaration, whereby one country promised a second country the land of a third country. It was unprecedented even in imperial history. It was normal to take other people's countries, but not to promise other people's countries to a third people. So I was thinking about this. But in the second part of this same Balfour Declaration, it states, above the signature of the Prime Minister, nothing shall be done which prejudices the existing rights of the existing population in Palestine. Whatever happened to that promise? When are the British going to deliver on it, live up to it? Or is it another fork-tongued, perfidious Albion operation? Email from Derek, I think we could have an Australian Norma. I think you're right. Sylvie, if you're listening, you have just been designated our Australian legend, Sylvie in Melbourne. That means you get open access to this show every time you call up. George is in Carlisle, also on Palestine. Go ahead, George.
Good evening, George. Thank you for taking my call. I wanted to pose to you three questions in moral philosophy, if I might. Can you hear me okay?
I can. I'm just daunted by the three questions in moral philosophy.
Well,
do bear in mind I'm a graduate of the Michelin School of making tires rather than one of our great universities. But I'll do my best. Go on.
Don't give me that. Right, question one. These are hypothetical, of course, in case Mr. Claude is listening, and I know he does. Question one. I attack you in the street, and a fight ensues, and you injured. I injure you, and you injure me. In court, can I say that I was acting in self-defense? Question two, I'm an SS officer, I'm at the Warsaw Ghetto, and I'm putting down the uprising. At the Nuremberg Tribunal, can I claim I was acting in self-defense? Question three, I'm a sex trafficker. And unfortunately, some of the women I'm trafficking break out and attack me. And I, in turn, resist and injure them. Can I claim self-defense?
Well, I put my hand up, George. I put my hand up because as a moral philosopher, you have encapsulated absolutely brilliantly the dilemma that we are now in. I myself tried to do it earlier in the show by pointing out the uncontradictable legal position that an occupier does not have the right of self-defense vis-a-vis the person whose land he's occupied. Whether the occupier wears a Nazi armband or wears an Israeli armband is immaterial. If I seize your property and you fight against me doing so, I cannot claim any legal rights because it is I who is the thief, the aggressor. It's I who invaded you, and you have a legal right to fight me, but I don't have a legal right to fight you. George, last word to you.
I was going to say it's even worse than that, because as the occupying power, they have a duty to protect the Palestinians.
Yes, and, yes, you're right.
You know, burying pregnant women under tons of rubble, ripping the limbs off children, that's not protecting them. That's the exact opposite of protecting them. Can I make one final quick point, George? Just on shields, human shields. Because we hear a lot about this. I've got in front of me Amnesty International's report on Operation Cast Lead, when Israel killed 3,000 Palestinians in 22 days. And that report from Amnesty says that Hamas did not use the civilians as human shields. However, it goes on to say that the group that did use human shields was, in fact, the Israeli army. They forced children to walk beside tanks. They forced them to probe in rubble looking for unexploded devices. They made them walk in front of the soldiers, putting their weapons on the children's shoulders. So let's have no more of this talk of Hamas and human shields, because the Amnesty report, and you can download it for free on the internet, shows that it's actually Israel that does that.
Well, I'm agog at the quality of calls that we're receiving on the show this evening, and yours was simply perfect, as others have been. A state of war now exists between Britain, the British government, and the British so-called opposition, and Amnesty International. Who'd have thunk it? All these Labour MPs, that when they were climbing the tree to try and become a Labour MP, were undoubtedly to be seen with an Amnesty International badge or clutching the latest Amnesty International report or quoting it in their speeches, are now in a state of war with Amnesty International, which is telling them that they are supporting criminal genocide. And the Labour MPs simply turn away. Not even going to waste time on the Conservative MPs, or waste words, rather. A state of war exists against Human Rights Watch. Who'd have thunk it? A state of war exists against anybody who is standing up for international law, the supremacy of the United Nations and its charter, the Geneva Conventions, the rules of war, the rules governing the responsibility of an occupying government towards the civilian population it occupies, and so on. A state of war against truth now exists in our country, George, and in many other countries. You can be criminalized and punished for speaking the truth now. My God, what a world we've reached. Slim Jad is in New York, and I'm going now to him. Slim Jad in New York, but on Palestine. Go ahead, sir. What would you like to say?
Assalamu alaikum, George. Thank you for having me.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Welcome.
I just would like to say something about the cowardice of the Muslim and Arab countries from Morocco to Saudi Arabia. Once the events occurred on October 7th, we saw the international community all take sides with Israel, but unfortunately we saw none of the Muslim and Arab countries say anything against the murders and the genocide going on in Palestine. Actually, this weekend there was a huge boxing match featuring the heavyweight champion of the world, Tyson Fury, with another contestant, Francis Ngannou, and they actually started kicking out people for wearing T-shirts saying "Free Palestine" and having Palestinian flags. Can you imagine this? In a Muslim country, in Saudi Arabia, censoring Palestine and the Palestinian flag.
Well, of course, that's dismaying. It's not true that they haven't said anything, but when all's said and done, there's a lot more said than done. And there are things that could be done very, very cheaply indeed. Just calling an OPEC meeting and placing on the agenda the question of an oil embargo would move mountains in international relations, send the price of oil rocketing, filling their pockets even more. They don't even have to have an oil embargo, just discuss having an oil embargo. And what the case for? A Muslim country supplying oil to Israel when it is murdering thousands of people, most of them women and children. I have never heard. I don't think anyone could make that case. What the case for continuing normalization? Saudi Arabia does not have normalization. with Israel, but others do. And what the case could possibly be to normalize relations with Israel at this point in time, I cannot possibly imagine. It is literally beyond my imagination. So I want to encourage the Arab and Muslim governments to keep talking, because the talking is important, but they need to start acting and backing up their words with action. Let me leave it at that. Thanks for the call. Now, there's a Bristol meeting coming up, a No to NATO meeting. I'm not speaking at it myself, but it's a very significant group of speakers. Warren Thornton, the journalist arrested for malinformation. Never heard of that one, have you? After exposing Trudeau applauding the Nazi Waffen SS member. Tony Gosling, a former BBC journalist of note. Chris Williamson, my former parliamentary colleague. James Tweedy, journalist. Dr. Judith Brown, political activist. Martin Summers, activist and journalist. And Konrad Rekas, a Polish journalist. Now that's on Saturday, the 4th of November at 5 p.m. till 8 p.m. Public meeting. Register on Eventbrite. An email from Victor. George, I'm in Yemen right now. We are expecting the worst of responses after the recent attacks from here. What do you think could be the response? I think it'll be overtaken by events, Victor, but keep your head down. Last caller, G is in Leeds on Palestine. G, welcome to the show.
Good evening, George. Thank you for having me on again. But I'd like to put a suggestion to you, which came to my head. What if we have a peaceful day of action, not a day of action strike, where nobody goes to work, and we just show solidarity with all the people dying in Gaza, and that send a clear message to the top brass like Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden, that really have to touch with people's thinking and where people are feeling about this conflict. And what would you think about that suggestion?
Well, God bless it in its intention. I wish that it was achievable. I doubt if we have reached the level of consciousness amongst the membership that would make such a stoppage of work successful. I know that we don't have trade union leaders, except with one or two exceptions, with the guts to fight for such an outcome. Such an outcome would once have been the automatic instinct of the British trade union movement, the strike action that was taken to stop the loading of weapons to support the white armies in the Russian Civil War, the action taken by the engineering workers in East Kilbride at Rolls-Royce to seize jet engines destined for the Chilean military junta, fascist junta. These would be normal instincts. But I think that British trade unionism has sunk a long way and will have to be rebuilt in a very considerable way, which will not be done overnight. But it isn't impossible, because this very day, the dockers in Belgium have refused to handle, to load military supplies going from Belgium to the state of Israel. There you had a trade union leadership that had guts and backbone and guile and brains, which won the support of a membership that knows a thing or two about being bombarded. A membership in a country that knows a thing or two about occupation, that knows a thing or two about panzers crashing through your border, crushing and killing your people, and the jackboot of fascist dictatorship, then stamping out all freedom and liberty. That's what the Belgian people have. That's why the Belgian workers responded. It's why the Belgian trade union leaders fought for it. It's why there's no weapons leaving Belgium for Israel, whether the government of Belgium likes it or not. I salute them, every last one of them. And thank you, G, for raising the issue, which is properly raised. And I'm only sorry I'm not able to give a more optimistic reply. That's all I've got time for. I hope you think that the show was worthwhile. I won't ask you if you enjoyed it. It's difficult to enjoy matters of the seriousness that we are now facing. If war breaks out on Friday at dawn, as I have predicted, then we will have a show on Sunday at the earlier time of 7 p.m. London time, the mothership, the Sunday mother of all talk shows. But the open question is how many other shows we'll be able to have thereafter, and how many other people will still be around to listen to it. Thanks for joining me. Bring someone, if you will, on Sunday so that we can boost this audience, millions strong, but continually subject to algorithmic suppression, even strangulation. I need you to be my voice to others. Good night.